Welcome to UK Sailmakers Lessons Learned podcast series, where we share stories and tips to help us all sail with confidence. I'm Brendan Huffman from UK Sailmakers Los Angeles. Today we are joined by Nathalie Criou, who has emerged as one of the West Coast top shorthanded sailors. Nathalie competed in the 2014 Singlehanded TransPac aboard her Express 27 and corrected out in second place. And she completed a double-handed Pacific Cup, which is a 2,200-mile race from San Francisco to Hawaii. More recently, in 2019, Nathalie skippered her Figaro II in the race to Alaska. Nathalie was born in France and lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. She has a ton of interesting sailing experiences to share with us, including being sunk by a whale during a delivery home from Hawaii. She is also a cancer survivor. Welcome, Nathalie. Look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, I want to jump right into this race to Alaska because down here in Southern California, it seems very cold, very windy, and a very odd format where you don't even need sails to compete. You can row it, you can pedal it. You win it on your Figaro II. What was your configuration? Sometimes there's no wind. What do you do when there's no wind without an engine?
Yeah, so Race to Alaska is a race where you basically have only two rules. One is no motor at all. You literally cannot be physically on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just have two waypoints. Otherwise, you just go all the way up to Ketchikan, which is the finish. And you have to have human-powered propulsion because you have to use that in Victoria Inner Harbor. It's not allowed to sail in and out of Victoria Inner Harbor. We had 4 regular bike frames mounted at the back of the boat, powering 2 propellers. We had a system where we could just lift them out of the water. We had 8 people, on a boat that's designed to hold 2.
And
max.
Some were sailors, some were cyclists, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
So how did you find cyclists who would want to do this very challenging race? Did you tell them what they were in for?
So we did have a few difficulties recruiting bikers because of the level of comfort, I think, of the boat. Mm-hmm. And some of them, we took them out on the water and then they were not comfortable with the movements of the boat. So we ultimately had one biker that we recruited online. And then we had 3 bikers that were just friends or friends of friends, mm-hmm. who happened to be extremely good bikers. We knew that we would have to bike for a long period of time. Mm-hmm. And we would have 2-hour watches. After that, we would rotate bikers. So we asked for minimum power output over 1 hour.
What's the distance of this race, the race to Alaska?
It's 750 miles.
How many days did you expect to be on the water?
I think we expected about 4 or 5 days, maybe 6.
What kind of currents do you encounter in this race?
Crazy currents. Portia Pass, for example, has about 9 knots of current. Simonau is at 16 knots of current. Our navigator, Neil, did a lot of study about the local current. You can't control everything, right? This is still a sailing race. So sometimes you can't make the time. They're really gates. Like if you miss the window, you have to wait for at least 6 hours and sometimes more.
There was a Melges 32, which was 25 miles ahead of you getting into the latter part of the race. And you made a tactical decision to sail into more breeze.
It was definitely gale. Mm-hmm. And so we said, hey, that's where the boat is at its best. Let's just take it there. We couldn't follow the Melges 32 inland when there was less wind because the Melges 32 is a much lighter boat. And so they would have sailed faster. If we wanted any chance of beating them, we had to do something different. And we actually got lucky. So the Figaro II is an offshore boat. It's very, very good in heavy seas and heavy wind. It is built for very heavy weather. And in this particular case, we got so lucky because it was a southerly, so it would have been downwind. The forecast was calling for about 40 knots. We saw 35, 38, 39. We never saw 40. And we just flew past them. We got there, I think, 20 miles ahead of them.
So you made up 45 miles in 24 hours on a Melges 32. And I should have mentioned before, there are no handicaps for the race to Alaska.
That is correct. You just get to the dock and then you have to ring a bell.
I like that. That makes it much easier for the race committee. What point of sail were you on for that 24 hours in the gale?
We were on a broad reach. With the surf, you actually have to sail pretty high because if you get caught otherwise at the end of a surf, right, then you lose speed. Not only is it bad for your rig and your sails, right, because you get like at some point a big puff of wind because you've lost all your apparent wind, but also you lose control because now the waves are like taking you wherever they want.
And what kind of sail configuration did you have? I'm sure you reefed your main. What kind of jib did you have?
We had a spinnaker up. We had our actually we started with a big kite which we blew, and then we put our small kite up, which is a small symmetrical kite. We started with a full main, then we riffed the main when the wind went above, like consistently above 32 knots, and that's pretty much the configuration that we had then the whole time. And the boat was super stable, a pleasure to drive. It was fantastic.
So you had a 200-mile day. When you're going that fast, I'm sure your crew was tired from pedaling.
So the sailors loved it, right? Obviously, this is a treat for any sailor. The bikers, interestingly, stayed up on deck with us often, just like to keep us company. And I don't know if they enjoyed it. I didn't ask actually, but they were definitely showing, team spirit. It was really great to see that the bikers were also kind of raising up to the opportunity and becoming sailors themselves and full members of the team.
That race is quite a trial by fire, I think. I can't imagine that being my first experience racing or even sailing. Anyway, so you made up a lot of time on the Melges 32, and then approaching the finish, the winds moderated.
And so Ketchikan is a little bit up inland, and the wind even completely shut down. We had to pedal away to the finish line.
As I recall reading the sailing instructions of this race, there is an assortment of prizes, including cash and a set of steak knives.
We actually finished third. By the way, there was a Shark 40 that finished first, and so they got the first prize, which is $10,000. And typically they just pin it to a tree and you just have to go and get it from its Ziploc bag. The second prize, which we call, the first loser prize, is a set of steak knife. And then there's no prize for all the other finishes. Most people don't do this race for the prize. You really do it for the adventure. What is great, though, that you have so many different types of boats. You can always find a boat that's kind of similar to your boat, and you will have a race.
Okay, I want to switch gears. You did Singlehanded TransPac, which is another 2,200-mile race from San Francisco to the island of Kauai, Honolulu Bay. So doing that solo is an accomplishment. Doing it on Express 27, which is so small, goes even higher in my book. I'm seeing your videos on YouTube on the Express 27, and that was a challenging race too. And I unless I'm mistaken, I think you had an autopilot issue.
I had my primary autopilot that just broke. It was just basically just burned, like the brain just burned out. So I had to go to a secondary pilot, and then I had massive power issues. A lot of wires just corroded away during the race. So that was very challenging because it means you have to effectively steer a lot yourself as opposed to have the autopilot steer.
Right. And when you have to steer yourself, you start losing sleep. You can't leave the helm. What point of the race did you lose your primary autopilot?
4 days in. It was so basically the first 4 days were brutal. We had about 40 knots, gusting 45. It was a big gale. And I think the autopilot just didn't like it. I think he got a big surge of current and that just kind of did it in. So pretty early in the race.
So you sailed at least 1,600 miles without use of your primary autopilot.
Yeah. And the second one, I mean, it works, but it obviously is not a high performance autopilot, although it really surprised me. So I had a pelagic as a spare autopilot. And it worked surprisingly well, even though we didn't have any of the sensor input. So we didn't know about, kind of wind direction, wind speed, or any of that. I think he had a GPS inside, but that's it.
I've done a few races to Hawaii. Only one time it was blowing 35, 40. I can't imagine what it's like on a 27-foot boat. And how long did that gale last from the start? How many days?
About 4 days, because I think that's when you get into the lighter air zone of the race where it's all like about a pound wind. It's not that bad. I mean, we're not upwind, right? You're kind of reaching a little bit. And the boat had, I had 2 reefs in, and then I had my little number 4 jib, which I could still just sheet in with one hand because it was so small. It was just really, really wet. When you are very light, there's actually an advantage often because you can just go really fast.
How many days did it take you to finish that race?
I think it was 11 or 12 days.
That's pretty quick.
Once we got to the trade wind, there were quite a few squalls at night. So that helped make, I think I did a 180-mile day at some point. So it was really, really helpful because the Express also is very fast downwind.
Oh, yeah.
Sails really well. So as soon as you get some wind downwind, then you start to be really competitive. And then there was one day I was just so tired because in the lighter air, you have, of course, the physical need of being just awake, but it's very mentally tiring, right? Because you constantly have to trim your sails, you constantly have to make an adjustments because the apparent wind is so light that if you move, an extra half a knot, right, you might be like going 25% faster than you were, and so now all of your sail trim is off. I had to take literally half a day off. Like I just had to just take a jib and a main and just sleep.
I think everyone in Singlehanded TransPac goes through at least one of those periods where they're just so drained, they just need to sleep, and they lose a few miles, so be it. What time of day did you finish in Honolulu Bay?
It was broad daylight, so that was great. It was much easier because you have to go past a reef. I mean, then there's a bunch of boats that are anchored. And of course, you're sleep deprived. And so now you have to like figure out how to anchor. But this is where the Single-Handed Sailing Society really helps. They have a boat out, they have people on your boat, they help take your sail down, they help anchor your boat, they bring you a drink of your choice. They even brought me croissant. It was fantastic. It was probably the best croissant I had in my entire life.
Personally, I think Honolulu Bay is one of the most beautiful anchorages in the world.
I mean, Hawaii is such a paradise for sailing because you have wind.
So let's talk about another race to Hawaii you did. You did double-handed division in the Pacific Cup, which I have done, and that is also challenging in different ways. What kind of boat were you on?
I was on the Sam Express 27, same autopilot. Double-handed really, in this case, right, means you're single-handed half the time.
Right.
So you get to sleep a bit more, but otherwise you're still mostly handling the boat on your own with the autopilot.
And how many days did that take in the Pacific
So
Cup?
it was much lighter air that year, like particularly at the start. So I think it took us 14 days.
That's so interesting to me, is that it's kind of feast or famine that first day or two, leaving Northern California. There's some years where boats are adrift off the Farallon Islands for 2 days. And other times it's blowing 30, 35 knots and you're holding on, wondering how you're going to do this for the next 2 hours, let alone 2 days. Did you sail more aggressively when you were double-handed in terms of keeping the chute up longer when it was windier, or did you play it safe?
We definitely sailed more aggressively, and I think it's because we felt that there was this comfort of sleep. I kept the chute up, even single-handed, right? As soon as I was on deck, I think when I took it down, it's like, okay, I'm too tired, so I'm going to sleep. But often I would sleep early morning when the wind would be lighter, and then I would then hand steer at night during squalls. So but the kite would be out. That's what actually makes these boats so fast and so fun. Actually, the major issue that we had in that race is that forestay broke day 4 also. Like everything happens to me on day 4, I think, on those races. So we were afraid of losing the rig. Fortunately, it happened when we were already downwind. We had the spinnaker up. So basically say, well, just don't round up. Just let the spinnaker hold the mast up. We rigged one of a spare line, basically, right? We had our halyards first to try to help it, but that was not going to be strong enough. And of course, if we had our halyard hold up the mast, then we couldn't use the halyard to hoist sails. And then lines are very stretchy as opposed to cable. So the mast was pumping a lot. So there were some conditions of wind and waves where we could actually have the kite up because the mast was like really all over the place, and we were worried that it would like just go through the deck at some point. So we had to take it really slowly and really kind of experiment and see what kind of conditions we could actually sail. And then we also used that to improve a little jury rig.
Where did the headstay break? Was it at the bottom of the toggle or the top?
No, it was inside the swage, because it was not, typically it would break right at the edge where you have a bit of coercion, right? And then that obviously it's a little weakened, so it would break there. No, but it was literally inside the sway, and then it just kind of pulled out.
Was that the original headstay when the boat was commissioned, or had it been
No, it
replaced?
was a new one, but it had been put on the boat about 4 months prior to the race, and then we had done quite a bit of racing and sailing on the boat with that forestay because we didn't want to have anything new on the boat. But yeah, sometimes accidents happen, and and then you just have to deal with it. But obviously, that we were actually winning our division when that happened, and then we very slowly ended up going backwards compared to everybody else.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It seemed, just studying the gear failures in TransPacs, obviously single-handed TransPac, we hear about autopilots failing because
Yep.
in the other races you can't use them.
Mm-hmm.
Boom vanes, rudders, and headstays.
Yep.
A lot of headstays have broken in these races too. Okay, now I want to talk about returning from Hawaii. Why don't you start with what kind of boat it was, and then when you experienced the whales?
Yeah, it was a 440 who had done the Pacific Cup race, and so I was part of the delivery crew with the owner and then 2 other people. So yeah, we're about 500 nautical miles north of Hawaii, about 4 days into the delivery, maybe 7 knots of wind, pretty calm seas for the Pacific. And yeah, we saw a pod of sperm whales. We actually didn't know there were sperm whales. We just say, hey, whales. We tacked away from them, but we were all on deck with our camera taking pictures. And then we just heard a very big noise, and it was one of those whales who decided to ram the boat. And we didn't know at the time again, right? Like, it was like, okay, what's going on? And then as we investigated, we found a 2.3 hole in the hull, and then a lot of cracks also all below the waterline.
Yikes.
Yes, it's as the skipper, who's a British, said it, like, he looked at this, it's like, this is significant damage. Like, yes.
So you guys quickly had to make a decision. And I'm sure the decision immediately was begin preparations to abandon ship. How long did it take for that decision to be made? And how long did it take for the boat to take on so much water that it was clear you need to get off?
So the skipper, of course, in these conditions, right, like really like kind of take charge of everything. And to his credit, the boat was very well prepared, and then he just did not lose his calm, and so he was very precise and direct in his commands, which make things a lot easier. He made the decision really early on, but I think it may have been also, hey, just in case. Like, I don't know that he said, hey, we definitely are sinking, but I'm not going to chance it. So he instructed one crew member to deploy the life raft. At the same time, he issued a mayday on the SSB radio and on VHF. And then what we're trying to do is, of course, try to stop the water from coming in, like stuffing the hull with big sail bags and that kind of things. But it still took about 30 minutes ish for the deck to be awash, basically. So like the cabin was full of water, and then it was like the deck was starting to be underwater.
Yeah. What kind of bilge pumps were you using? I'm sure there's an electric bilge pump on a boat that size and some manual ones. How effective were they?
We're using everything that we had, including bailing buckets and the intake from the engine, which we directed to the inside of the boat instead of the sea, since it was pretty much the same thing by then. I mean, it wasn't a match for the rate at which the water was coming in. Putting stuffing a sail bag helped a little bit, but it was still like coming. And then the cracks, there was like so many small cracks, but all like they would started to add up. We tacked the boat the other way to make the portion of the hull that was below the waterline a little smaller. We reefed the main so that there would be less of a bow wave, right? So less water coming in through the speed of the boat. We also wrapped a sail on the outside, a jib, to try to get some pressure against the hull, but the sail was still, I think, too porous, so there was still some water coming in. But all those efforts, I think, got us to 30 minutes. I think otherwise the boat would probably have gone down much faster.
And what degree of panic was there on board, or was everyone really focused on the job and no need to be overly scared?
There was no panic. I think to a large extent, it was because you modeled a lot of your behavior on the skippers, and the skipper was very calm. He knew exactly what to do. Okay, well, we have a major incident, but we prepared for it. First order was like stuff the hole. I had to figure out how. But then he, turned to another crew member and said, "Hey, deploy the life raft." So, and then he said, "And get the food and emergency water, whatever." And then he went to the radio and decided to be a communication person. So because it was so precise, and I think after that, you're just so focused on the very short-term problem that you no longer have time to be panicked, and it becomes just an engineering, kind of problem.
Nathalie, when the skipper got on the radio, single sideband and VHF, did he get a response right away to his mayday, or did it take several tries?
We didn't get any responses at all. Obviously, we set off the EPIRB. We also had a satellite phone, and that's really ultimately what saved us. But we used the sat phone on the life raft.
And who did you call from the satellite phone?
So that at the time, now I think you can make emergency calls from satellite phones, but at the time you couldn't. It wasn't wired up that way. So, and we didn't have the phone number of the Coast Guard. So we called his son. I mean, he called his son, who happened to be boarding a plane back to Los Angeles. So, and it was right at the time where the flight attendant would come in and say, "Sir, you have to turn off your cell phone now."
Yeah.
And then I was like, "No, I have to take this call." So he took the call, and then we had our GPS coordinates. So he shared the GPS coordinates with the pilot of the plane, which shared those with the control tower, and the control tower took those coordinates to the Coast Guard. And that and the EPIRB was like two data points that confirmed that there was a problem. So we wound up in priority in terms of response.
So I just like the visual of the skipper's son boarding a flight. I'm just going to imagine it was British Airways being told to turn off his phone, but then working with the pilots in the cockpit to provide the coordinates to the Coast Guard.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Actually, the first phone call was to the race committee, but it was really early in the morning, so we just got a voicemail. So, your call is important to us.
Yeah, that must have been really frustrating, but
exactly.
But, comical when you get back to shore. Did you have any challenges or problems getting from the boat into the life raft?
Not at all. No. The life raft was, I mean, the boat was still afloat. So it was easy to just step into the life raft. We had plenty of time to load water, to load food, to load all of our grab bags. Where we had, our passports, we had some spare clothes, and that was it. And then we were all wearing our foul weather gear, even though it was quite hot. So there was absolutely no problem at all. The life raft deployed as it's supposed to. You just kick it out, you just pull the painter, and then it just kind of self-inflates. So it was a 6-person life raft, even though we were 4 people on the boat, because you couldn't find any smaller. But to be honest, 6-person life raft felt really small. Like between us and the gear, like we didn't have enough room. So I'm trying to imagine 6 people. It would have been a nightmare.
Having done the safety at sea classes where you get in the life raft with 8 other people, it's really cramped. How did you disconnect the painter from the sailboat before it sank when you were in the life raft? Did you cut it, or was there enough time to untie it?
We cut it. We had a knife and we cut it.
Did you see sharks?
We didn't see sharks, but technically it was a part of the world where there are sharks.
Yeah.
And in particular, great whites. It's very rare that great white sharks don't just typically attack human. Like whenever they are attacked, it tends to be a mistake. And in this case, we didn't look anything like a seal.
How long were you in the life raft before you were picked up?
So little less than 24 hours, but our spirits really improved after 6 hours, because this is when the Coast Guard sent a plane. We were out of range of helicopters, so we could not be rescued just like directly from the Coast Guard. We saw the C-30 plane. They threw a canister in the water, which we had to kind of swim for, and in it was a VHF, which is when we started to be able to communicate. But at that point, we knew that at least the Coast Guard was alerted to our condition, and then definitely, putting our trust in those professionals to kind of rescue us. And we were really not in, we were in a precarious position, but the sea state was really calm. It was a very nice warm day. So there wasn't any, immediate danger. None of us were injured. We had plenty of food, plenty of water. We were under a canopy, right? So there was no risk of being sunburned or anything like this. So it was definitely not something you want to prolong for too long, but it was not something that was, absolutely urgent and terrible. And then they ultimately redirected a container ship to come pick us up.
And did the container ship take you back to the mainland or to Hawaii?
The container ship was on its way to Yokohama. We had learned that there was one fishing boat who was also on its way. That fishing boat was on its way to Hawaii. And so in the end, the captain said, okay, well, why don't you go onto that fishing boat? And so they transferred us onto the fishing vessel.
And how long did it take you to get back to Hawaii? 2 days from your pickup spot?
I think 3 days, but yeah, 2-3 days, something like this. They definitely were very, very welcoming. And also, at that point, they had no obligation to take us on.
Well, I'm glad that story ended well. And it's very educational. Again, I've been to these safety at sea seminars where there's a lot of great information, but hardly anyone who teaches these seminars has actually been in a life raft or had to abandon a sailboat before. Nathalie, I want to start wrapping up. I want to make sure people know where to find you. Your website is nathaliecriou.com.
If anybody wants to take a look and see what it's like to do Race to Alaska, we all filmed things and then we just edited it together into a movie. And then we also had some footage from the race organization or other boats. Nat and the 7 Dudes, it's on YouTube.
It's been fun speaking with you and checking out your website. And one of the big coincidences, we're supposed to race together this weekend on a Santa Cruz 52.
Hey,
the Islands race.
Fantastic. Yes. Fantastic.
But, Nathalie, thank you so much. You've been listening to Lessons Learned from UK Sailmakers. You can check us out on the internet, uksailmakers.com, and you can find our podcasts available in our newsletters and on our website. Thanks for listening.